Hello, I'm Lugatorix and welcome to my Saxons faction guide for Rome Total War Barbarian Invasion. Today we're going to be discussing the faction of the Saxons. Nice bit of alliteration there. Okay, technically that is an alliteration. I don't know what that is. They sound similar. Rhyming, whatever. I've gone completely off track. Today we're going to be discussing about the Saxons. We're going to be talking about their units, their position on the campaign map, and just some sort of like general strategies. So, the Saxons start off in this dark orange region up in the north, what we probably call nowadays Denmark. Their difficulty factor is estimated moderate. That's fairly vague, but it's basically one of the sort of middle ground difficulties. Not very easy, not very hard. The campaign sort of objectives is to hold 18 settlements, including tribe of Saxons, which I believe is the region you start off with, so if you lose that you're pretty stupid. Britannia Superior, which is the bottom region of Britain, and Belgica, Belgium, basically the other region that's over here. Yeah, I know. So, the Saxons have superior close combat infantry, very limited cavalry choices. So yeah, this is a very infantry, particularly heavy infantry based faction. So if that's your kind of thing, big sort of axe wielding monster men, then this is probably the kind of faction you want to play as. They're relatively similar actually to the Franks in this regard, they're both sort of Germanic, but also the Franks haven't got many great cavalry options either. So, no more nonsense, let's just get straight into it and talk about some of these Saxon units. So these are the Saxon units. I know, there's not a lot of them. There is not a lot of choice in terms of the Saxons. The vast majority of the units are infantry, and there isn't a huge variety of them, but what they do have is pretty good. So, you're not going to have a particularly diverse army. There's only one missile troop in the whole army. There's only 3 cavalry units from what I can see. But, if this is your kind of thing where you're just like chopping people's heads off, which is a little bit sadistic, but maybe you do like that because that's the kind of thing you're into, then the Saxons are definitely few. So we're going to just start off straight away with the peasants, and I say the same thing every time. These are barbarian peasants, incidentally. They're pretty trash. Really, they're only used for garrisoning settlements that are never going to be attacked ever, and they're in the middle of nowhere. Attack of 2, defense of 5, poor morale. They're just never going to stand up to anything. I don't think anyone realistically relies them in combat, so whatever. Then we get on to Levy Spearmen. So I actually said they had 1 missile troop. Technically this is a missile troop as well, but really they're not missile troops. They're spearmen that incidentally have missiles. This is kind of similar, I would suppose, to the sort of Limitane, which of the Roman factions, which are spearmen that incidentally have missiles as well, but are still primarily spearmen. So these are spearmen that are only honestly not a huge step up from peasants in the sense that they are, well, it says here, raised from among the low status men of the tribe. Attack of 7, defense of 10 is significantly better. A charge bonus of 4 actually isn't too bad for spearmen either, but really spearmen are defensive units. They're not really going to be charging in either. Now the missile is quite useful though. It kind of has the same effect as Hastati in the base game of Rome Total War, where they will just stand there, throw the missiles and then move forward, or if you're advancing towards them, they'll throw the missiles and then they'll stand there and take hits. So basically what it does is it just slightly weakens the enemy, slightly lowers their morale before you even engage in hand-to-hand combat with them. So pretty useful actually. This unit isn't amazing. They will not stand up to an absolute ton. Charges around the back and the side and they will be pretty much screwed, but actually, in a defensive position, holding down a street or something like that, not too bad, not terrible. Nothing particularly amazing, however, that's for sure. But now we're going to get onto the better sort of axeman kind of units, and this is more like it. Chosen axemen, picked for their size as much as their skill with the axe. Yeah, these guys haven't got a huge amount of finesse to their game, but they make up for it just in terms of sheer power and, well, willpower as well. So, attack of 14, defense of 14, charge bonus of 5, so pretty good all-round unit. They can take hits, but they can also hit pretty hard as well. They have good morale, so once they get involved in combat, they will stand and fight all day, which is good. They're not going to break easily. You don't have to worry about them too much in the heat of battle. They are effective against armor, which means they're not just going to be useful in the early game. They're going to be useful later on as well, particularly against units that are going to increasingly have better armor as other factions, improve their technology over time. These guys are going to be able to chop through that and sort of negate the fact that other factions are going to have good armor as well. So pretty damn solid unit indeed, and good stamina as well means they can fight for a long time. They won't get quite as tired, quite as quick, which means they're more likely to hold on for longer against the enemy. Any unit with good stamina and good morale is pretty solid because they can just stand and fight for a while, even if they haven't got a huge amount of finesse. But incidentally, these guys can hit hard, so even better, right? Now we're going to move on to Saxon Kiel, a collection of cutthroats, bandits, pirates and murderous sea scum, at least to their enemies. Lightly equipped, they are best used as raiders. So, not amazing attack of 7, but defense of 16, so pretty nice indeed. Not, not amazing, but not bad at all. Charge bonus of 4. They can make a shield wall, so they're kind of like, more similar to these guys, I would say, in the sense they are more sort of defensive unit, and their shield wall is actually quite hard to get through. It's similar to a phalanx of Rome Total War, not quite, but it is similar in the sense that it is compact. It is a compact defensive formation, not quite as overpowered as the phalanx of Rome Total War, but still pretty damn solid indeed. These guys sadly don't have good morale or good stamina, which they'd be significantly better if they did, because they would just be able to stand, fight, hold their position all day without breaking. Unfortunately, these guys don't, but they're not going to break straight away either, because they have that high defense, which is nice, and the shield wall means they're quite adequately protected if you use them well. But again, charges into the back and the side, and they could be a bit vulnerable, as is the nature of sort of spearman-y type units. Then we have Saxon Hearth troops. Picked men sworn to defend a lord. I mean, that's pretty badass. These are like swordsman type units. Attack of 11 is pretty solid. Nothing too amazing, but pretty solid indeed. But defense of 23 is very, very high for a sort of offensively based unit. These guys have a big shield, which is contributory to that 23 defense, but they also have good morale, good stamina, and just good armor in general, so they can stand up to a lot. And again, like I've said, they're not going to break that easily. So this is a pretty badass unit in the sense that they're just going to stand there with their sword and chop heads off all day without actually taking that many hits themselves. And even if they do, it doesn't matter, because they're just going to continue doing what they love, which is killing people. I mean, you've got to respect that in the context of Rome Total War, of course. So a nice unit. If you like your sort of big heavy swordsman, then you're going to love these guys. These guys are going to tear through a lot of inferior units. Particularly if you rush the technology of your infantry buildings, then you can just sort of dominate a lot of other factions, because they're just not going to be able to stand up to these guys. If the Romans are fielding garbage like Limitane, then, well, have a field day. Enjoy killing them, because you've earned it. Then we have hunters, and it's important. A lot of these factions I find when I play Total War, a lot of these factions that are very infantry based, particularly very heavy infantry based, kind of lack missiles, but hunters actually aren't too bad. They're not amazing, but they're not terrible either. Missile attack of 7, they're actually competent in the melee, 6 and 8 attack and defense respectively, with a charge bonus of 5. Now, charge bonus of 5 for archers, that's pretty solid. They can do a little bit of damage. Now, obviously, you're not going to be relying on them in the melee, and if you do, you've probably lost the battle anyway. But the fact that they have that good stamina, they're not going to break straight away. They can do a bit of skirmishing. They can scare enemies like elephants and chariots with their missiles, particularly flaming missiles. They can do a decent amount of damage. And 7 missile attack, although not amazing, they are a pretty consistent, accurate unit that have a decent range to them, and if used correctly, can certainly do a lot of damage, particularly on top of walls. And there's going to be a lot more wall fighting in Barbarian Invasion, because of the nature of the game. It's set later, so there's going to be more walls. Stick them up on some walls, and they can defend a settlement really quite handily indeed. Put them up on a bit of high ground, and they can do a lot of damage, and they're just a great support unit for these guys. These guys are going to be holding the front line, doing the damage, but also if you get these guys around the side, just getting hits on the enemy, it's going to just nick and knock at their morale every man by man, and they're going to do a lot of damage actually overall. So quite a good unit indeed. So Saxon Sea Raiders, I mean, they still sound cool though. I mean, the stats aren't amazing, but that is a pretty badass name. I like that. So 7 attack, 12 defense, nothing incredible. Charge bonus of 7 isn't actually too bad though. This is kind of the unit which is going to just do a little bit of damage if you hit them. Use them to hit the sides. They're sort of impact troop where you can just get that one charge in, and they could break an enemy which is sort of teetering on that sort of wavering shaken, and you just need that one charge very, very quickly. These guys can do it, and not too badly at all, because they're fast moving still, getting there quickly as well, and they can swim, so pretty cool. I don't know if horses can swim in real life, but these ones can, so I mean, they're sea raiders, it kind of makes sense. But being the nature of light cavalry, they're naturally not going to be amazing in a sort of long slugging match. So really they're better for just sort of pursuing troops and getting that charge in if necessary. But because they only have a defense of 12 and they don't have good morale, they don't have good stamina, in a long fight they are going to suffer and eventually die, particularly against spearmen, obviously. And then we move on to mounted nobles, the best horsemen available to a Saxon warlord, so sort of the general's unit equivalent kind of thing. So attack of 10, defense of 22. These guys are better, but then they're going to be better. It's the sort of warlord unit, so you'd expect them to be better, that's for sure. They are more like, they're sort of heavier cavalry, so they're more likely to survive a longer time in a sort of heavy slugging match like we were talking about. So a little bit different to the Sea Raiders. They can actually stand up to a bit more. And again, it's coupled with that good stamina and good morale, and the fact they're well armoured. They can actually do a fair amount of damage, but they will stand up for a while. It could turn the tide of battle if you've kind of run out of infantry and you need that big charge, that big sort of moment in the battle for the cavalry to carry the day. These guys can certainly do a good job. Nothing amazing, nothing like a cataphract or anything like that, but solid unit, which is what you'd expect. And then finally, the actual warlord himself. And this guy, again, you would expect him to be good. Excellent morale is quite damn rare. I mean, excellent morale is something you see on stuff like Spartan hoplites. So excellent morale, pretty good, especially for cavalry. So these guys are very, very similar. Honestly, they have similar stats. 2 hit points, meaning you essentially have to kill them twice. But excellent morale means that they can just stand and fight all flipping day. So actually, although the cavalry, I mean, you're not going to have a ton of warlords because that's the nature of the game, particularly at the beginning, only with one settlement. And you're going to be able to churn out these guys a lot more. But still, when you have one of these guys, they can do certainly a good job at just churning down an enemy. That's what they do. Good, solid, heavy cavalry, like you'd expect. So, these are the Saxon units. We're now going to talk about some campaign strategy on the campaign map. So, I'll see you in a few minutes. And here we are. This is the Saxon starting position. I say this every time. I'm going to say it again though. The fog of war is off. That is purely for demonstration purposes, just so I can show you what is around without it being covered by shadows. I obviously do not play with the game off fog of war. I consider that to be cheating. If you can see the whole map, but just for demonstration purposes, it makes it a lot easier if you can see what's around. So the notifications you get is a people in flight. That is obviously the Huns and the Vandals that are in flight. They're the hoarding faction at the beginning, the hoarding factions at the beginning. So the Saxons start off with one settlement. It is Vicus Saxones. Nothing amazing. It is actually losing money at the beginning of the game. It is pagan, of course. This is the Saxons. And it is in the sort of Denmark region. So really, you need to be quite aggressive early on, because you actually start off with a very small force. That's nothing amazing. I mean, one of the units is Barbarian peasants, and only one unit of solid infantry, and then probably the least solid out of the Saxon armies, and then a Saxon assassin, and that's flipping it. I think that is literally the only military force you'd start off with. Let me just double check. But I'm pretty sure. Oh no, sorry, you do have this guy as well, but nothing too amazing. It's pretty much similar stuff. So you really don't start with a lot. But what you do start off with a lot of is money. 15,000 denarii you start off with, which is lovely stuff. So what you need to do is very, very quickly build a lot and recruit a lot. Okay, you need to build a big army nice and early on and start expanding quickly. So you can pick up the mercenaries, you can start, and what can you recruit from Vicus Saxones? Pretty solid units, Saxon kill, you can get some good spearmen along here as well, some solid archers, and then you can start thinking about moving up to the better stuff like over here to help you out. So yeah, I would recruit a lot early on because you're going to be expanding pretty quickly. So obvious places to take early on, I would say Campus Chatii is a good place to take early on, and Campus Frizii, or Frizzy, I'm not sure how you'd say that, but Frizii. Be wary though, there is actually a proper general here, Adelwulf, which is a pretty badass name. But yeah, Chatii and Frizii I would take pretty much immediately, because you don't want anyone else getting to them. You don't want the Franks getting to them. You don't want the Western Roman Empire, although I think they're pretty weak. They're unlikely to go for that, to be honest. You don't want the Burgundy or the Lombardy to go for them. So take them for your own. You should be able to get them pretty early on. You send one army to Frizii, one army to Chatii. Take that pretty quickly. That's just nice. You start then, you've tripled the amount of settlements you have in only a few turns, which is great. Then you've got to work out where do you want to go next. Now, obviously, you have a lot of freedom really in this regard, because you're going to be expanding there's really a number of directions you can expand. You can focus on the Western Roman Empire, which is in a very weak position early on. They're likely to face trouble with rebellions, they're likely to face trouble with the hordes, and against factions like the Franks as well, and the Berbers, so they have a really tough time of it. So you could take advantage and go for stuff like Colonia Agrippina and flipping Augusta Treverorum and all of that. You could also decide to go for the Franks. The Franks are a faction which, I believe though, they do hoard. Let me just check that very quickly. Yes, so the Franks are indeed a hoarding faction, something you'll need to consider, and of course, so are the Burgundy and the Lombardy as well. So, let's have a look at the options. First of all, once you've taken Frisia and Chatti, you can consider going against the Burgundy and the Lombardy. Now, I wouldn't do that because they're going to hoard, which means that if you defeat them, in quotation marks, they're going to spawn a ton of new armies out of nowhere, basically, and start causing you more trouble. So, I wouldn't. I would just let other factions deal with that, let them die of their own accord, and I wouldn't worry too much about going to them. It's just going to cause more trouble than it's worth. These settlements aren't even that good anyway, so not worth expanding east in my opinion. The Franks, again, wouldn't go south. Number one, you don't want the Franks to hoard, but number two, if you keep expanding south, you're just going to make yourself sort of more surrounded, because you're just going to have even more territory to the right and even more territory to the left of you, as you sort of have a sort of vertical empire. Not good. You don't really want to have a vertical empire. Never good thing. So don't expand basically south in my opinion, because you don't want to be too surrounded, and also why trigger a horde if you don't have to. Now you could go for these regions, these sort of Western Roman Empire regions, and you could do that, and you're likely to face the Western Roman Empire rebels if you do that, but that's not a big issue. But there is one option which I consider to be better than that, and the option that I consider to be better is Britain. Britain just makes much more sense to me. And, well, first of all, it's historically realistic, which is quite cool. The Saxons invading Britain, I quite like that. But in terms of actually strategic-wise, well, Britain is a great place to launch an empire from, much better than Denmark, because it's an island. And it means it's very defensible. And also, the Western Roman Empire are vulnerable in the early stage. Now, if you leave it too long, in fact, probably only like a couple of turns, one of these settlements, particularly Londinium, is likely to rebel, causing the Romano-British, which is the sort of Western Roman Empire rebels equivalent in Britain, to spawn, and they can be quite fearsome because they can, spawn a big army. So you might want to go to these guys quickly, but if you're unafraid of the Romano-British, a great place to go here. The Celts aren't too difficult to deal with, and they're likely to have a few skirmishes against the Western Roman Empire anyway, so they're going to be a little bit weak. So I would just get a ship, bring your army, come over here, storm Britain, which you should be able to do relatively easily, in my opinion. I think it should be not too difficult at all. I never have too much trouble against the Celts, and the Western Roman Empire have so many issues that you coming over will just be way too much, and they should falter. Bear in mind you have a lot of money, so you can pick up mercenaries if you need to, and it just means you have some nice settlements with ports, and also it's just a good launch pad to move forward. And then I would start moving towards what you would now call modern-day France, sweeping through the Western Roman Empire, who at this point will be very highly fragmented and just not having a good time of it. Bear in mind you can keep recruiting the sort of Denmark region, and you can just sort of pincer them from over here, pincer, over here, pincer, Western Roman Empire, not having fun. That is basically what I would do as a sort of opening move, and then just start descending down towards Italy, where the sort of more profitable regions are. I generally don't like to get involved in the big mess that is over here. This is a mess where all the barbarian factions are fighting each other. There's hordes coming over, and then they're triggering other hordes. It's too much. It's just too much effort for me, for very little reward. These areas are much more rewarding, particularly Britain, and then obviously moving them further south later on in the game to better settlements. It's just not enough effort. It's too much effort and not enough reward to go against tons of hordes over time. So there's basically my advice. Expand west and then expand south. It's pretty simple, sort of strategically. You just need to think about recruiting a lot, getting a lot of that infantry, taking up quickly, and then using that much superior infantry to your advantage against rubbish Roman Libertani, basically. So that is pretty much all for this faction guide. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll be back with more very soon. I hope to do all the barbarian factions. So, barbarian invasion factions rather, not just the barbarian factions. So, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you around.